What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Jim Parsons of the Hockey News, and we've got lots to talk about today. All of the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we get into all of that, I do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys. First up, we got to talk about the Eastern Conference Final. It continues. Andrei Svechnikov was the overtime hero for the Carolina Hurricanes on Monday night. In Game 3, he gave the Canes a 2-1 series lead in the conference final. So the Hurricanes now 5-0 in overtime in these playoffs. And teams with a 2-1 lead in the conference final historically have won their series 77% of the time. So pretty decent odds in Carolina's favor here. This is the fourth trip to the conference final for Rod Brind'Amour since he's been the head coach in Carolina. He and the rest of the Hurricanes have talked about how this group just feels different than in previous years. So this is a team that we've talked about before, Mike, as they've always been right there. They get right there and just can't quite get over that hump. But do you think that this team has shown some growth and maturity in these playoffs? And how much of an edge do you think this gives them against the Montreal Canadiens?
I do think they've shown growth, but if you don't think that Rod Brind'Amour was sticking pins in a voodoo doll to prevent the Florida Panthers from being his opponent in the conference final, you got another thing coming, because that was the impediment. They could not get past a bigger, tougher, more playoff-ready team, and they're not. I mean, Montreal, I give them all the credit for beating Tampa and for beating Buffalo in 7 games, but I think, you got that rest versus rust combo here, and for this was the the 17th game that the Montreal Canadiens have played, and it's only the 11th game that Carolina has played, and I think that's starting to show. But one thing you're starting to see in this series, that the number one line for Carolina in the playoffs has been that Jackson Blake, Logan Stankoven, Taylor Hall line, and they combined for a goal in Game 3, but their top forwards, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, are finally starting to produce, and that's something that you're not seeing out of Montreal, and that could be the death knell for the Canadiens if they can't get Slavkovsky, Caulfield, and Suzuki going.
Yeah, Jim, as I mentioned, Andrei Svechnikov, of course, the big overtime winner for Carolina in Game 3, and it's positive for them to start seeing their top forwards, like Mike was talking about, starting to perform. Unfortunately, Sebastian Aho has really not had his best series for Carolina, but do you think that, if these guys are starting to get going at the right time here, that could be sort of the edge against Montreal?
Yeah, I think so, 100%. I mean, when you look at Carolina in the past, the knock on them has been in the playoffs, they haven't gotten that scoring, right? They've always been a possession team. They're a tough team to play against. They're definitely a difficult out, but they just haven't been able to score in those crunch moments when the games matter. Those top guys are starting to do that. You add a Nikolai Ehlers to the equation, who's had some really big games for them. Taylor Hall, who I don't think anybody saw as a difference maker coming into the series, has been a difference maker in the series. Like, he has been fantastic in the playoffs. They're getting that scoring they weren't getting before. And so when you add that to the equation from what Carolina is known for, a tough team to play against, a team that grinds, a Brind'Amour style team that's in your face, pressuring in all situations, putting a million pucks on net just to see what happens. And then you've got Montreal, who's more of a shooting team, not getting the shots on goal, trying to get the percentages, not going quantity over quality. Like they just are really picking and choosing more than Carolina, who just dumps everything on you. So in your face style, Carolina has always played has been tricky, but they just haven't been able to put it all together. Now they're getting that scoring. They're an experienced playoff team who are now kind of coming. And when you talk about Aho, who's not having a great series, imagine if he starts to pick it up, right? So this is a team that's going to be a difficult out. And when you look at what Colorado's doing, they're now easily probably the guys that are going to be the ones you got to beat. So Carolina's put it all together. It's fun to see.
It is, and you mentioned Montreal being a shooting team, but not getting shots on net. So we definitely have to talk about that here because in game 3, the Canadiens were outshot 39-13. That includes a stretch over 20 minutes between the third period and overtime when they failed to record a single shot on goal. So Carolina has been very stingy defensively, which we've talked about already, but the Canadiens are averaging the fewest shots per game among all playoff teams this year, and that's throughout the entire playoffs, not just this series. So, Mike, what do you think has been the biggest issue with Montreal's offense? Is it just as simple as their top guys are not acting like their top guys, or do you think that there are any meaningful adjustments they can actually make to turn this series around?
Well, if they had an adjustment, I think they would have made it by now because this hasn't been limited to the Carolina series. Remember, they were outshot 29-9 in game 7 against Tampa and won. They gave up 39 shots to Buffalo in game 7, only had 25 shots and won. Eventually that's going to catch up to you. They're just not generating enough offense. They're not generating enough. You can get shots on goal and not have good offensive chances if you want to throw the puck on the net. I mean, the way to beat Freddie Anderson is to get multiple shots, get rebounds. He's only faced 13 shots in game 3. So that's a successful thing for Carolina to limit the shots on goal. But I don't know how Montreal can sort of shake loose, especially against a Carolina team that is suffocating defensively and a defenseman like Lane Hudson, who has had a speed advantage on every team that he's played against Carolina, like those mighty might forwards like Blake and Stankoven, they can fly and he was taking hits in game 3. That's something that if he continues to take physical punishment, that'll just limit Montreal's offense even more.
And, like we've talked about, Montreal, they haven't been an easy out against the Hurricanes here. I mean, they've taken the Hurricanes to overtime. We've seen that. There's some fight there, but Jim, what do you think is the biggest issue with their offense right now? And, aside from just they obviously they need to put more pucks on net, but what, if anything, can they do to get back in this series?
Well, I think it starts at game 1. When you look at that first game, Montreal took advantage of what was a rusty Carolina team that had sat for a really long time, right? Now, they didn't use that as an excuse. They didn't say, oh, hey, we were rusty. They did everything but say that. But that was clearly the case. I mean, Jacob Slavin was not Jacob Slavin in that first game, right? He let so many breakaways. Montreal took advantage of that. And I wonder if that sort of affected how they approached game 2 and game 3, thinking that maybe they'd found something on Carolina that is no longer there. Carolina has closed that hole. And they've targeted Lane Hudson. They have absolutely gone after him. And so much of Montreal's offense flows through him. He skates more than anybody else in the league. He's always got the puck. He's moving around like crazy. And Carolina's not really letting him do that. Now, he's going to take, as he did at the end of game 3, responsibility for that overtime goal, which I don't necessarily think was totally on him. Yes, it wasn't a great play, but I think there was a lot more to go into that goal than Hudson giving it away. But Carolina's shutting down Montreal because they're shutting down Hudson. They figured out how to close those holes so Montreal can take advantage of those breakaways they've got. And while Carolina is not a team known for blocking shots, in fact, I think they were dead last in the NHL during the regular season. It isn't about that. It's about their possession. It's defensive and offensive. They're first in the league in both categories, right? So I think when you have that going on, you figured out how to shut down a superstar like Hudson, who most of that offense drives through him. If the scorers aren't scoring and capitalizing on their limited opportunities, it's trouble for Montreal. So I think that game 1 situation was kind of it fooled us, maybe thinking Montreal was more in this series than potentially they realistically were. And Carolina just figured out how not to do that again, right? And once that mistake was corrected, it became Carolina's series. And you've seen it in game 2 and 3. Carolina has dominated Montreal. That's just the fact now.
Absolutely, especially when you look at those shot differentials, it's really hard to argue otherwise. And you mentioned Hudson. He scored for the Canadiens in game 3, so they haven't been able to shut him down completely. But when they have, neutralized him as much as they have, it's really been a difference maker for Carolina in this series. Shifting focus outside of the playoffs, while we wait to see who comes out of the East and the West, although like we mentioned, Colorado rather shockingly has fallen behind quite a bit in that series. So we'll see what happens there. But looking around the rest of the league, some interesting news out of Toronto from the Maple Leafs. They announced on Monday that Max Domi is going to be out indefinitely due to complications that arose from an off-season surgery. So Domi had been undergoing the surgery to address an issue that he had apparently been playing with through the entire 2025-26 season. And this is the first news or first announcement of that injury. So the Leafs didn't provide any details on what kind of injury we're talking about here and what he was taking care of with the surgery or when he's expected to be back from the injury, other than to say indefinitely. So he's going to be reevaluated by the team at the start of training camp. That's all that we know at this point. So Mike, what do you think of the news, first of all, given that this is something that we had received no indication of prior? And how, if at all, do you think this affects Toronto's offseason plans?
So what you're saying is we have a lot of information on this. I mean, and I understand completely that, you know, they, with other players like Austin Matthews, they've never specified location of the injury or the severity of the injury. That seems to be what's going on more and more in the league. The concern that I have with Domi is, especially with the state of that team this year, they were essentially eliminated a couple days after the Olympic break. If he'd been playing with a serious injury, something that was limiting him, why wouldn't you get it taken care of in March instead of getting taken care of in late May? Now, normally that's the fact that maybe he wanted to rehabilitate it or treat it medically and not have surgery. I get that. With Domi, and we don't know anything in terms of details, he's a type 1 diabetic. And as a diabetic myself, that affects the healing process. So the complications might have to do something with that. All I know is now there is a situation where they don't know when or if he's going to be available, if this is a long-term thing or something that could, you know, last into the season. And that's another now I'm critical of Max Domi. I think, you know, he's not a very good center. He's not very good defensively, but he is a decent player, somebody who could play in the middle six of your lineup. And now that's one more player that the Leafs will have to try to find either in free agency or trade this summer.
Yeah, kind of a bombshell here. Like you said, if this evidently was not a new injury, this is something that Domi had been dealing with and is now just getting addressed. And really, Jim, you know, the lack of information here does make it difficult to speculate, but it seems like the Leafs are being very careful not to put any sort of timeline on this. So what do you think this does for their offseason plans?
Well, it certainly adds to the to-do list for John Chaika, right? Like he already had a huge list of things that he probably wasn't going to get all of that taken care of in the summer. So when you add this to that now, it's going to be challenging for him to figure out where he's going to go to try to find a replacement. And I'm guessing he's possibly going to need to do that. Now, we don't know anything, but the concern on the statement that Toronto released for me is that there were complications from the surgery. And typically when you have complications from a surgery, those things tend to last longer than the actual rehab or the injury itself originally would have been. That's the troubling thing for me. Now, we don't know anything, so it's too soon to assume, but that concerns me when you're talking about a player who's having complications, typically like a wrist injury or something like that, where there's problems at the healing or the bone doesn't do whatever it's supposed to do or whatever's going on here. Complications tend to really drag out. And so if that's the case, Domi could be out for a while. And if that's what's going on here, then they're going to need to figure out how to replace him. Now, obviously, they're looking at LTIR as my guess, and they can probably work with that. But this still is a lot for him to do, for a new management team to come in, try to figure out how to replace that player or find some kind of suitable option, plan B, for him, assuming they had, you know, an agenda for him or a role that they wanted him to serve next season. So, yeah, it's complicated for them. They had so much to do, and now they've got more. And there's really no knowing how long this is going to last.
Yeah, still not a lot of answers there, not any answers there in terms of those questions. And speaking of not having a lot of information, Let's talk about Nashville. Let's talk about the GM search in Nashville. Still looking for their next GM after Barry Trotz announced he's stepping down to retire. With the draft not immediately approaching, but nevertheless approaching, it's become a bit of a question of what exactly is going on in Nashville and why haven't they named a successor yet. And one of the primary theories is that they are looking at someone who is currently employed by a team that's in the playoffs right now. So that leaves us with four teams, four different options. So Elliot Friedman actually mentioned on 32 Thoughts this week that Colorado Avalanche GM Chris MacFarland is, quote, a logical target for the Nashville Predators. Typically, Elliot Friedman does not say things unless he's heard something. So worth noting there. He added that the length of the search definitely makes it look like the Predators are waiting to talk to someone, as I mentioned, who is still in the playoffs in that race. Mike, do you think Nashville can pull MacFarland away from Colorado? Does he seem like a smart fit for them? Or do you think that there's something else going on here as far as why Nashville's taken this long?
I mean, it only makes sense that they're waiting this long because it is somebody who is with a team right now. It would make no sense that they would wait until after the Stanley Cup final to name a GM. That being said, Elliott's report, he indicated a few years ago when MacFarland was approached by the Anaheim Ducks or Colorado was approached to get permission to talk to MacFarland as an assistant GM. Joe Sakic talked to him and they gave him the GM job, and Sakic moved to, I think, VP of Hockey Operations. That might be what happens here if MacFarland is truly interested in the Predators job, that he wouldn't come in as a GM. He would come in with a title bump of VP of Hockey Operations, and then maybe hire somebody underneath him. But that's the only way it makes sense. I mean, it probably would be a title bump and a significant raise from what he's making in Colorado. Otherwise, I don't know what the heck they're waiting for.
Yeah, Jim, there has certainly been chatter out there, not only from Elliot Friedman, but Jonas Siegel in Toronto did mention the possibility of that VP title bump for MacFarland, which would make sense for him to leave Colorado and come to a place like Nashville. But what is your take on this whole situation? I mean, is there any other reason you could think of why this would be taking so long for Nashville to name Barry Trotz's replacement?
You know what? That's probably the reason that this is being delayed, just to get the chance to talk to him and see how interested he is in the job. It does sound like there might be some mutual interest there, and I can only imagine it's because of one, he's probably looking at his situation in Colorado and realizing he's not moving up in that organization. Joe Sakic's not going anywhere, so he's not going to be given a promotion within the Colorado organization. There's also this series, and it would be weird to say that only one series affects the way a guy looks at staying with a particular team, but Colorado and their series with Vegas, losing changes everything, right? Once you are in a situation where you're not as dominant as you thought you were, or maybe you want a fresh start somewhere else, or you have another opportunity that you get a chance to look at. If Colorado is swept or eliminated early out of this playoff run by Vegas, who knows, right? Like, you just never really know what somebody's thinking after they go through a series like that. And if he talks to Nashville right away and he goes, you know what? Yeah, this was a disappointing loss for us. This is an opportunity that may not come around again. I could see that being something he's intrigued by. So I'm guessing that this is probably a situation where they would just like to talk to him before they make that decision. And like we're dealing with in Edmonton here, we're talking to coaches and Bruce Cassidy, they're going to wait till the playoffs are over before they give any permission to do that. And assuming they give permission at all. So it's going to be one of those situations because he's still under contract for, I think, 2 more years. So it's something that he's probably interested in. It's something Nashville, I'm sure, is definitely interested in. But I should ask you, I mean, you're the expert in Nashville. What's your take on this whole thing?
I have to agree that I think that there is certainly the likely possibility is that they are waiting to talk to someone. It could be MacFarland now that we've heard this name enough times. And I think there should certainly be interest on Nashville's part in hiring him. Again, whether Colorado is going to grant them permission to speak to him might be a different story, but definitely could see it happening with that title bump of VP of Hockey Operations. And also important to keep in mind another name here who has been available this entire time and has expressed interest and there's been mutual interest, and that's Tom Fitzgerald. So I think that there is definitely a situation, there's definitely a scenario, a possibility where you could see, maybe a MacFarland and Fitzgerald coming into the front office in Nashville. Fitzgerald, whether that's as GM, whether it's in an advisor role, something of that nature, because I think there's definitely mutual interest there. So my take on it is I think that there is not just going to be one announcement, one name. I think there's going to be a few changes to the front office in Nashville. But again, as far as what that looks like, I mean, we're just as much in the dark here in Nashville as everyone else is. So should be a lot of news coming out here around the time the Stanley Cup does come to an end, the Stanley Cup playoffs come to an end, because definitely a lot of positions looking to be filled here with the draft again approaching. And Jim, you had talked about how in Edmonton you're dealing with similar issues with the coach, and obviously a lot of discussions ongoing there. So I think the Oilers are at a bit of a crossroads here. Obviously, they're under the time crunch of the duration of Connor McDavid's contract here to kind of figure out what exactly they're going to do in these next couple of years. And they've had issues when it comes to adding impactful talent on July 1st when free agency opens up. So Jack Campbell was bought out 2 years into his contract. Victor Arvidsson was traded to Boston after just one season. Andrew Mangiapane was traded more recently to Chicago. So when you're looking at what is certainly not a short to-do list for the Oilers this offseason, Jim, do you think that they should be focused on trying to add players through trades this summer, or what do you think the top priority should be here?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to have much choice, to be honest. Like, we forget about Jeff Skinner too. That was kind of a flop in Edmonton as well, right? But I think there's a few things that have to happen here. I mean, there's talk about list of to-dos in Toronto. There's a list of to-dos in Edmonton too, right? Finding a coach is right at the top of that priority list. It sounds like Bruce Cassidy may not ever get permission to interview with Edmonton, and the NHL is going to stand by that. So that the Vegas might not let him do that. And if that's the case, they're going to have to figure out what coach is going to be the best fit for this group. And I think they're looking for somebody who has won before, can push buttons, is respected enough by the elite players on this team to be coached. I think that's a thing. And then I think some of these players are going to be interesting for Edmonton to bring back. I think they want to bring Connor Murphy back. I think that's a priority for them. I think they're looking at Jason Dickinson, but I think money matters, as it does with Connor Ingram. I think they liked him, but I don't think they want to overpay for him. I don't know that I would make a lot of other decisions until that coach is hired, because you want to talk to the coach and go, who do you want to coach? Because there's a lot of talk around here about Darnell Nurse, for example, and whether or not he'd be willing to waive, and it doesn't sound like he is, but if he would be, would the Oilers be able to trade him? You don't necessarily want to do that if, one, the consequence of that is that you anger Connor McDavid, and two, you get a coach in there that wants Darnell Nurse on his team, right? If that's the case, then you don't necessarily want to trade or move Darnell Nurse, bring in a coach and go, man, I wish I had a Darnell Nurse, right? So it kind of depends on the order in which they do things, but I do believe they probably should stay away from July 1. I don't think they want to be big players there. Now, if there's, a player that comes to them and says, yeah, I'm really interested in Edmonton, I'm happy to take a deal here to play with Connor McDavid or Draisaitl. Let's say, for example, an Alex Tuch out of Buffalo. I don't know that that's an option for them. I think at $10 million, that's probably not on their radar, but if that's what he's going to get somewhere. But if he comes in and he says, well, yeah, I want the opportunity to play here, then I think the Oilers should look at it. Outside of that, I don't think they want to go and grab smaller depth pieces like they tried to grab before. I think the Mangiapanes, the Skinners, the Arvidssons, those players just didn't work, right? And part of that is because of the ice time for stars and the meshing chemistry with those guys. I think it just doesn't play out. So I think you got to make trades. I think you got to sign the guys you really want to keep. And then you got to work on some of the holes that you have in your goaltending and other things like that. And a lot of that's going to be conversations with the new coach, whoever that winds up being.
Well, and regardless of Edmonton's history with signing free agents, Mike, we've talked about numerous times on the show that this year's free agent class leaves quite a bit to be desired. So whether or not the Oilers have had success in free agency in the past, I mean, do you think that it would behoove them to actually focus more on acquiring talent through trades?
Well, I mean, on the margins, they should be involved in free agency. There are probably a couple players out there that they could get on a reasonable deal, maybe short-term contracts. But, the question I have in terms of trade is, what are you trading? I mean, are you trading Isaac Howard? Are you trading Matthew Savoy? You've traded the 2026 and 2027 first round picks. How much can you get for second round picks or your 2028 first? It's like, how much do you don't want to mortgage. I understand you're on a clock because I think Connor McDavid is leaving in 2 years, but you have to address the massive holes that Jim was talking about. Number one, the goaltending. And I don't think if they re-sign Connor Ingram, that Connor Ingram and Tristan Jarry is a combo that's going to win you a Stanley Cup. I think you either have to go out and sign a Sergei Bobrovsky as a free agent, or you trade for a Jordan Binnington. If you don't do that, then I think you're just whistling past the graveyard. And just like Morgan Riley in Toronto, Darnell Nurse has a no move clause. He doesn't want to go anywhere. And if he doesn't want to go anywhere, he's not going anywhere. So it's sort of like, that's, they've got albatross contracts like his and Trent Fredericks. I don't envy Stan Bowman in the slightest.
Well, speaking of older players, that leads very well into our next topic of discussion, although certainly a different situation than Sergei Bobrovsky, but an older player nonetheless, and that is Sidney Crosby. So he's got just one more year remaining on his current contract with Pittsburgh, although he's made it clear in a recent interview that he did with The Athletic that he has interest in playing for quite a while. He was asked about potentially playing another 5 years, and he said that would be nice, but added that he does intend to continue taking 1-year deals to make it as flexible as possible for the Penguins organization to succeed. So for context here, Crosby is turning 39 in August. He had 74 points in 68 games this last season. So, I mean, he is one of those that really, I think, just embodies the phrase of, age is just a number. But Mike, can you see Sidney Crosby playing for 5 more seasons?
Sidney Crosby won't say it publicly, but I'll bet you anything that the motivation here is to be on Team Canada in 2030, because losing and not being able to play in that Olympic tournament and seeing the U.S. win, that probably really is burning in his soul. So I will bet you anything that he will do everything within his power to play until 2030. I mean, I don't put anything past him. He's sort of the Gordie Howe of this generation. He's, almost 40, and really there has not been a significant drop off in his play. So, and I think he affects in a way the Pittsburgh rebuild, because he's not going anywhere. Maybe Malkin will be, maybe Letang will be, but he'll be there. He'll prevent you from completely bottoming out and getting top 5 draft picks, but you'll compete for the playoffs every year because he's Sidney Crosby. So, enjoy it, Pittsburgh, while you can, because he's once in a generation.
Yeah, he really is. And, he mentioned that he wants to keep taking these 1-year deals. So he's made it clear that he wants to be part of the solution in Pittsburgh, regardless of his age. So, Jim, when you look at that, and you look at Pittsburgh has obviously had quite a bit of success, even if they're not getting those top 5 draft picks. They're still getting these really talented young players. Guys like a Ben Kindle, for example, was a revelation for them this year. So when you look at sort of that, the youth movement, but also Crosby sticking around for that, do you think that he can be part of the solution in Pittsburgh for the next 5 or so years?
Yeah, I think Crosby will play as long as he wants to play. Like, that's the reality of the situation. He's not going anywhere. Pittsburgh's going to trade him. And by the way, I don't know if either one of you noticed while we were recording this, Evgeni Malkin just signed a 1-year deal, $5.5 million with Pittsburgh today. So he's also looking at those situations. And I think Crosby's proven on 1-year contracts or any contract whatsoever, it's not about the money. I don't think he cares about the money. I think he cares about winning. I think he cares about playing. I think he cares about being involved in the game. And as Michael mentioned, he cares about the Olympics and Team Canada. And he'll take, and now league minimum is more than 870,000. He'll take any number that's got an 8 and a 7 in it. That's the reality of his situation. So I could see him signing for another 1 year, 8.7. I think it could go down to 5.87. Like, whatever he wants to do, Pittsburgh will figure out a way to do it. I don't think it's the same situation between a Crosby and a Malkin. I think Dubas and Pittsburgh realize Crosby is Crosby, and you just let him play as long as he wants to play, and you figure it out, and the two will get together, and he's proven that he can do that. I think Malkin was more of a, like, do we do this situation than the year he had last year. It was pretty obvious that he was too good not to at least look at this again, even though I don't think Pittsburgh was really gung-ho at the beginning of the season to do it. but they figured it out. And I think as long as those two guys and other guys like Letang are wanting to figure things out, Pittsburgh's going to keep looking at this, right? So Crosby is Crosby. He's going to play as long as he wants to play. He's going to be productive in whatever role he chooses to be productive in. He'll play whatever role works for the team. He's so selfless when it comes to playing and being part of the Penguins organization that there's no reason that he won't play 4 or 5 longer if he wants, right? Like you mentioned Gordie Howe there. I mean, he's going to play until he decides he doesn't want to anymore. And I think that's fair. He's earned that.
He absolutely has. And thank you for that as well. You heard it here first on the Wraparound live breaking news. Evgeni Malkin, 1 year, $5.5 million, staying in Pittsburgh through this next season. Do want to wrap up talking about Nico Hischier with the New Jersey Devils, because Pierre LeBrun suggested in a recent article that he wrote for The Athletic the possibility of Hischier being traded by the Devils if he doesn't sign an extension this summer. So he's 27 years old. He's got 1 year left on his contract, carries a $7.25 million cap hit. LeBrun did mention he believes that an extension is the most likely outcome in this situation. But I mean, Mike, if it should get to this point, what teams do you think should be pursuing Nico Hischier if first-year GM Sonny Mehta does make him available?
Well, I mean, he's one of the best two-way centers in the league, and he's coming off an 8-year deal, and he's scored 60 points or more 5 straight seasons. He's, somebody who's always involved in the Selke for best defensive forward. He's the perfect second-line center, but the thing is, for him to sign, he's probably going to be getting more than Timo Meier, more than Jack Hughes because of the market, because the cap is going up. It's going up to 104 million this year and probably up to 120 within a couple years. So if they're not willing to sign him for that much, then, it's sort of the Jason Robertson situation of the Eastern Conference. He's got 1 year. Either you trade him now or you risk losing him. Teams that I think would make sense. Well, it has to be a team that has a ton of cap space and a team that has young assets to trade. And I think of San Jose. To him as a 1-2 combo behind Macklin Celebrini would be fantastic. LA, after losing Anze Kopitar, they have a big hole up the middle. You'd probably have to trade a Quentin Byfield to get him, but you're talking about a center. Maybe Dallas. With Robertson, if they're not willing to sign him to a long-term deal. He's a winger, and then you're trading him for a center. In the East, I think the team that, Emma, I'll let you predict. What team have I been saying all year is looking for a second-line center? The Montreal Canadiens. And this playoff has proved you need somebody behind Nick Suzuki. If you have Nick Suzuki and Nico Hischier as a 1-2 punch, two of the best two-way centers in the league. That's the best two-way center combo I can remember since Brian Trottier and Butch Goring back in the 80s. It would be awesome, but they would have to pay through the nose to get them.
Well, hey, listen, Montreal's got Alex Newhook now, so if you're going based on the playoffs, I don't see what the problem is here. But no, definitely, hey, maybe Hischier reunites with old buddy Tom Fitzgerald in Nashville. I mean, the possibilities are endless here. So, I mean, Jim, when you look at this situation, knowing, of course, that an extension is going to be the most likely outcome here, any other teams that we haven't talked about that you think could be a potential fit for Hischier, knowing how valuable centers are in this league?
Well, I read the LeBron article this morning, and one of the things he mentioned was there were 3 teams he name dropped, LA and Montreal being one of them. Minnesota was another one, and that's going to be really interesting. And if we want to have some fun with this, like you talked about, Hischier probably signing in New Jersey, and I imagine he probably does. But let's say it doesn't pan out. Let's say Simon Nemec is still not happy. What happens if Quinn Hughes decides, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to stay in Minnesota. There's a blockbuster in the making there, right? Like that's a very interesting one because Minnesota needs a center. They're going to need a defensive replacement for Quinn Hughes, and not that Nemec can do that, but those are the pieces of a very big deal that you could potentially see happening, if the cards fall in a certain way. And having said that, LeBron mentioned there would be like 12 other teams involved in this if he went to market. Like if he was available, there's a ton of teams that want to get in on that. And probably more teams are in than not in if those conversations start happening. So he's a really solid player. I think he's somebody that if the Devils choose to move on could really get a solid return for. And I think there's a lot of teams that would be really interested in, depending on the fit, He could be a 2, he could be a 1. So I think there's a lot of options there. But yeah, I don't know. I think he'll probably stay in New Jersey. But yeah, I love the idea of what happens if Quinn Hughes decides. You never know, because there's that draw to New Jersey, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Yeah, second blockbuster Quinn Hughes trade in as many years. I mean, it would be very exciting for sure. I don't think there are many teams that wouldn't want to be in on the Nico Hischier business, though. It would definitely be interesting if he does not sign an extension in New Jersey. But of course, if you want to read any more about any of these scenarios, the players, the topics, the storylines that we've talked about today, please head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. You can get 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. And that is going to do it for today's episode of The Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and listened to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We will be back with an all new episode this Thursday. But for now, for Michael Augello and Jim Parsons, I'm Emma Lingan, and we will see you next time.